Hello, everybody. This is the OLM Working Group. Today is August 27th, 2020. On the agenda, we are going to discuss issue 330 against the operator registry repo, which will include default channel override for support status. We're going to talk about a new community-facing channel for OLM development that's hosted on Kubernetes Slack. We are going to discuss an enhancement where we actually called for a few reviews on we're going to discuss an enhancement that I wrote quite a while ago, and we finally got merged. We called for reviews on it in the OLM dev facing, community facing Slack channel, so we can, we'll continue to try and pull more reviews from that channel in the future. We are going to discuss OPM a bit, and we are going to discuss how OLM will soon be hosting all our working groups on Zoom. So pretty full agenda, so we'll just get started. Chris, do you want to take the floor with the default channel overrides bullet?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to, so we've talked about this several times now, and I know, Evan, I think you're thinking that this would be an easy one to do, and I haven't seen much on this yet. So this is basically the problem where you're injecting bundles into a catalog, and the definition of the default channel on the bundle basically sets the last bundle added ends up overriding the default catalog. So even if or the default channel, so if you're adding a bundle for a 1.0, even though you've got 3.0 in your catalog, the default changes on you. So the idea would be to add a command line parameter to OPM or something like that would allow us to basically set it back to what we really wanted it to after we added all our bundles. So I was wondering if anything more happened with that.
I can answer it a little bit. What the problem you're describing is what we're having right now. The fact that the default channel annotation is a required field. And sometimes even when you left it empty, OPM command will basically try to infer some information. Either pick the first one on the channel list or do some, reading package file and stuff like that. So it's always thing that every single time you do a bundle add, you need to do some default channel adding as well. And I think that's not a really desirable behavior, especially on the example that you pointed out on the proposal, that when you're actually adding a Z stream from an older version that doesn't involve any changing of default channel at all. But because default channel information is there, OPM will try to changing it. And I think this is something we can fix rather easily. And I think we can just basically create a story to let this thing moving forward. And I think that should be it.
Yeah, that's great. So you guys have said this for about 8 weeks now. So I'm trying to wonder, how do we actually make this happen?
So I put a link to an enhancement proposal that that was posted a while ago. The purpose of that enhancement is to define a syntax to update sets of metadata that are package level metadata for the index outside the scope of adding or deleting bundles. I think a lot of the reason why we haven't had a lot of effort and traction into this specific problem is that doing that in a more generic way is, I think, probably something there's a little more appetite to do in the project. Just in terms of like priorities. So if there's like from the community a lot of requests for this specific thing, we can certainly try to like talk about, hey, let's focus on this short-term problem a little bit more before we have the more long-term solution available. In
the meantime, I guess we talked about giving me a workaround that would be supported with the current state of the catalog implementation. So like, for example, directly manipulating the database. Is that optional? Is that an option?
Well, yeah, I mean, theoretically, right, you could go and just like modify the database and then rebuild a catalog image and it should work. I would caution that directly interacting. Yeah, exactly what Nick said. Like I would certainly not like codify that at all, because that database changes all the time and the schema around it is not a public API. If we really needed to have some kind of first class thing as a workaround, we could probably do something like introduce a new command that just like specifically modify the default channel for a package. I would feel safer adding something like that. But yeah, I guess it just all depends on like how critical doing something like this is right now.
Well, this is super critical because now, so this goes into my question I'm going to have later on here about the Semver skip patch. So we are modeling all of our operators using Semver channels. Okay, so we're having like 1.1, 1.2 channels. So we're not using stable, beta, anything like that. So we're going to have a lot of channels over the next few months here. And we're starting to leverage dependency origination, right? So we're trying to use the dependency. Eventually we're going to use dependency YAML, which will help with that. But right now we're using GVK dependency lookup. So when we're creating a version of an operator, we're getting like a random version, or we're getting like a random channel, which is not what we want at all. So we basically have to disable all of the GVK CRD references in every single CSV we have to avoid that. We have to create another layer on top of OLM to instantiate all of those operators independently to make sure we get the right ones. Does that make sense? What the problem is?
So I think I understand the scope of that issue. I'm wondering. So I guess what I'm wondering is, how does modifying the default channel completely solve that problem?
It doesn't completely solve the problem,
okay.
But at least we're not going to ever put a beta channel as a default. So we have Semver,
Sure.
And we also have a few of them that want to do Semver with stable and beta. So where they're override, even with the new dependency YAML support, where you can do operator range, Semver range control, if you have those if you have a version showing up in multiple channels, then you're still going to potentially pick the wrong one, right? So it's with that, if we had a one version per channel in the future, dependency YAML version support, then we're okay because it'll pick the right channel. It doesn't use the default really. It uses it as a tiebreaker. But in GVK, we definitely have this problem majorly right now, and it'll get better because we're just always we're always going to choose the latest by default, at least for the time being. So this is kind of a statement in time, I think, until we get a couple of these other features in.
Yeah. So I think to be fair, or at least to give you some context into like where we are, a lot of this, I think what we're trying to do is solve a lot of this dependency resolution problem in the new resolver that now runs in OLM, and which ties back into dependencies.yaml. That basically, if we had a way of defining generic sets of properties on particular operator versions, then a dependency could be defined to specify like, I actually only really want this very specific version, and not just like not just that version, but that version, you know, on a specific channel on a specific arbitrary set of properties that is defined by, you know, some metadata that gets attached to that bundle.
So is that in that? Is that coming also with the dependency YAML support? Is that a bolt-on enhancement?
So today, right now, the only thing that dependencies.yaml gets you by itself is the version dependencies. So you can resolve to a very specific version of your package. I think it's not well documented, but there is, if it's something you guys need in order to get yourselves unblocked, there is also a way to define a VU, or Evan, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. There's also a way to define a label property, and then you can like define a dependency on that label, which is separate from the version dependency.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I'd like to see more about that, because if we can use labels such, you know, that describes kind of like, you know, the beta or stable kind of concept, that would help us at least temporarily get around this.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's still in progress is we were talking about like what it would look like to model those properties in a way that's sort of generic and can be used for a bunch of different things. We didn't quite get to the spec that we wanted yet. And so in the meantime, we have a way for you to basically just like annotate a CSV with a set of labels, and then you can depend on those labels in your dependencies.yaml.
Can one of you put? Yes, Chris, I will make up a documentation on this. This is my feature, so I can put up. We had a doc on this, but the doc is not very clear, so we didn't actually put that officially yet. But I can create a doc for you on how to using label dependency and label property, and how to actually using it, and we'll publish that to everyone to see it.
Outstanding. Yep, I think that'll help.
It is still a weird behavior or a weird bug that if you add lots of bundles at the same time, you don't know what default channel you'll get. Yeah. So I still think it's reasonable to just go ahead and fix that, and that should also solve the problem in the short term, because we don't have the like nice declarative thing yet.
Yeah, so I agree. I think probably the behavior that should happen, that I thought happened, but I could be just wrong, is that whatever was the tip of the latest tip of the default channel should probably be the only bundle that's allowed to like update that configuration or something like that. Or maybe we use semantic version, or maybe we use something similar. I think there's probably the reason why it's not working correctly is that there's some ambiguity there. We need to like define a rule for it.
So, okay. So I think I just kind of heard to have a potentially strategic workaround for this. But then you still think there's value in providing some kind of API to allow it to override that, which is basically what, you know, issue 330 was all about. So how can we proceed to make something like this happen? Do I have to submit a PR with some code changes, or because this issue's kind of been pretty stale and we keep going back and forth with that particular topic? How can we get it prioritized, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why don't I do this? Let me take that. Now I understand the scope of your problem a little bit better. Let me take that back, and I will make sure we figure out how to prioritize that as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and when we do discuss this, perhaps we could do that in the new OLM dev specific Slack channel on the Kubernetes Slack.
That's a good point.
Oh, there's a new Slack channel out there?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Alex, you go ahead.
Yeah, you know, when we were contributed, OLM is, and you know, other parts of the Opera framework were contributed to CNCF, and we got some channels in the Kubernetes Slack because of it. So now we have like basically a Slack channel dedicated to this working group where we can discuss and people can reach us if they have any questions. So hopefully that will, make it so there's less of a reliance on this individual meeting for being all community discussions about OLM development specifically.
Awesome. Yeah, I found it. Thank you.
No problem. On that note, I think we know what we need to do next. So I'm going to move to the next bullet point, and it's actually discussing the new OLM dev channel. So we're just going to take exactly what I said earlier, and we're just going to close out that bullet point. Congratulations, everybody. Please reach out. Please contribute. We are trying to have more and more conversations in that Slack channel. The most recent one is mostly us just asking each other for enhancements, and whenever we get into more design stuff, we're trying to host it externally on that channel, especially when it's only upstream related stuff. So please jump in, comment, review stuff, and just drive conversations with us. It's probably going to be the best way to reach us in the future. I think our entire team's actually there too. And the more you guys reach out to us there, the more we're probably going to frequent it. So there we go. I did want to quickly discuss the next bullet point, which is just a new enhancement that's coming in. It's enhancement number 42 against the operator framework enhancements GitHub repo. I'm going to share my screen for just a second so we can look over that. Okay, can everybody see this? The right?
You see your agenda.
Yeah, okay, cool. Sorry, I was just updating a link. So the operator conditions enhancement, I just wanted to get some eyes on this because this is going to be a new feature, and it's going to there's going to be a two-part process. We're basically going to be introducing a CRD for OLM that will basically aggregate conditions, and there will be certain conditions that OLM will recognize. Specifically in this enhancement, we outline the upgradable condition, and we are going to update OLM so that whenever it creates an operator, it's just going to create an extra resource for that operator called, like a condition custom resource. And if you append an OLM supported condition to the status.conditions array, it will influence OLM behavior if it's a supported condition type. So if you go down to this section right here, I'll zoom in a bit so we can look at it. Okay. Okay, overshot that one. If we go down here and we look at this OLM, you can see that we have a list of OLM supported conditions that we're going to do. We have an example one just to set the scope of what we're going to be doing. And then we actually have the real conditions. So in this case, it's the upgradable one. And basically, whenever the upgradable condition is set to false, we are not going to update your operator to the next version. This is giving operator authors the ability to say, hey, I'm running a migration, a long-running process, which if you upgrade me to the next version, I might be placed in an unrecoverable state, which can happen occasionally, especially with all the new operators that are coming out. And the goal is not to guarantee that your operator won't be destroyed because of like a pod disruption budget or something along those lines. This is quite literally just to influence OLM so that it doesn't upgrade you to the next version when your operator can't do it, in order to provide a better holistic lifecycle management experience. So please, if you can take some time to look at this enhancement. It's a little bit weak in describing the library that the SDK team will be providing that allows you to update the condition CR directly using their library. The SDK project will be updating either this enhancement or introducing a new one that will further outline what to expect from that library. And this we welcome any feedback or any additions that you want to make to this enhancement. That's all I wanted to cover there. And the next item is Chris regarding OPM.
Yeah, so yeah, I know you guys already all know all this, but so there's the new mode, right, for Semver and Semver skip patch. And so I've been evaluating that for the past couple of weeks, and I discovered, so the way I understood it was basically assuming that you're using Semver versioning scheme for all your versions for your CSVs, and you use Semver skip patch, it would basically override whatever replaces or OLM skip range you would have in your CSV. In fact, the way I understood it is the CSV didn't even have to have those anymore because it would completely override those things. So I'm seeing close to that behavior, but the problem I'm seeing, so as I mentioned before, all of our channels are described as major.minor channels. So 1.0, 1.1, 1.2. If I back add like a 1.0.1 using Semver skip patch, I cannot switch channels. I can go from, it automatically upgrades from 1.0.0 to 1.0.1 within the channel. But whenever I try to switch channels, it no longer binds the two channels. It's like the graph didn't get updated quite right. Does that make sense?
Could you I'm not sure I totally followed order of operations.
All right, so the taxonomy I have is a very simple Semver technology or taxonomy where I want major.minor as the channels. So I want the customer to be able to pin the major.minor that they want. And then they just get the latest patch within that channel. With me so far?
Sure.
So if they want to upgrade from a minor to another minor, they would have to switch channels in order to be able to do that. Okay. So before, I had to have a pretty complex replaces and skip range in my CSVs to achieve that. And it would allow me to switch channels. It allowed me to skip patches, all that kind of stuff. If I take away replaces and skip range within the CSV and just use Semver skip patch, I can no longer switch channels. It doesn't resolve it when you actually query it. It doesn't say that it's an upgraded possibility to switch to another channel. Does that seem right?
So you're saying when you say skip, you're switching channels. You're saying, okay, so you have the 1.0.z operator installed,
yep.
and you change your subscription to point to a new channel, and
yep.
it's not upgrading.
Correct.
Okay. So I think that there could be something going on with the upgrade graph in that case. Something is not like there's something that's going on that's preventing OLM from understanding that new operator got added. Well, so
I think I understand what the problem is, but I'll just say what I think it is, and Kevin and Chris, you can say if that makes sense. So the Semver skip patch mode takes this set of input Semver versions and orders them and basically constructs the correct replaces and skips virtually within the channel that you've said all of those exist in. But it doesn't create any connections to anything else in any other channel. So if you wanted to be able to switch between channels like that, you would need to add the bundle you want to upgrade from to two channels, or go back and use the skip range so that when you switch channels, you can get to the right place.
You're absolutely right, and this seems like a really significant limitation of skip patch. I think that the intention was use skip patch, then you won't need to use skip range anymore. The problem is that that was only built in the context of channels. So
Got it.
so like skip patch just like doesn't have the ability to build those like edges of the graph so that it knows to upgrade from one to the next.
Okay. All right, that clarifies it for me. So I don't need replaces anymore because replaces is bad, but I still need skip range.
It's your decision. I think you can, if you want to be able to jump between channels like that, you can set skip ranges. I guess it's probably also worth mentioning that in the latest release of OLM with the new resolver, skip range applies anywhere in the graph. Like prior versions of OLM, we only looked at the head of the graph and checked the skip range. Now it checks the whole graph to see, so that might make publishing patterns simpler.
Yeah, because the problem we had is if we apply replaces in there, and if we start pruning the graph, right, then the replaces might not be there anymore, right? So we need to be careful. You kind of want to, get rid of that replaces logic altogether. So okay, so this is good. So it looks like this is a nuance in how this works, which I think we should document. And then I'm going to test the crap out of that with that in mind and see if that holds true. So this, if I can, hopefully I can just use skip range and then semver skip patch together. And I think that's still a better story than what we had before. Because if I can get a replaces, that solves a lot of problems for us.
Does anybody want to take on documenting this summer? Yeah, I mean, if Chris ran into it, it's possible that other people will too.
So I'm curious because it feels to me like if the goal, like it feels weird to me to still need to explicitly require the skip range annotation in addition to being able to like define your graph hierarchy. And maybe that's just like Evan said, it's just kind of a nuance of the way that the tool works. It would be nice. It seems to me like it would be nice if there was a way to specify that you want to have, like, to me, like it feels like the way that what exists right now has like these very specific opinions about that this data is for graph metadata and that this data is for resolution metadata, and we keep those two things totally separate. It seems to me like it would be nicer if we munged all of that together. I think we have started talking about that a little bit, right? Like if a channel was just a property on a bundle and not something which is specifically just for the graph, then setting the channel would just, resolve a subset of things. And the graph hierarchy just would come from like looking at the version and deciding if you should update from one to the next. Does that make sense? Like that distinction?
I think the distinction makes sense. I think even in that sort of worldview, which I think we're pretty close with the new resolver, I think you still have this question of if I'm adding something at a particular version and I want to be able to update from it in two channels, do I need to add it to both channels? Isn't that kind of the question here? Because like we've been talking about skip range, but you can also just say, well, add that to both channels that you need to be able to update it from. And
well, yeah, I think it depends on your taxonomy of your channel. So this is back to our other problem, where if you have a semver taxonomy, then yeah, you would do that. But if you don't, maybe you wouldn't, right? So it's kind of like are you all semver, partially semver?
But I guess what I'm wondering is what is the use case for I want this set of versions to be able to, like, if we're really in a world where semver is a first class concept and that's just what defines the update graph, is there a world where you don't want to be able to switch between channels and have those edges not just implicitly show up? Like, is there value to having that level of control and adding the complexity required to do it? Like, is that the right thing? It feels to me like we're only there because
an
of
exception to the rule. It seems like you normally want to do that, right? And it seems like the exception would be I don't want to support that one case because of the bug.
Right. And I think what we've been talking about a lot is for those weird edge cases, just have a declarative thing that can let you define your graph very specifically as like, here's my set of edges. And that by default, like, yeah, I agree. I think that's just like, you want that just behavior to just like work out of the box. It seems like that's how it should work. And the only reason it doesn't is because of like historical baggage and not because that's more useful than it not doing that. Does that make sense? Like, that's kind of where I'm thinking.
We definitely have operators that use channels as an update cadence, right? So they'll have like a fast and a slow channel. And for that case, I think it makes a lot of sense to not have the connections between the two channels just based on Semver, right? Because you'd probably want to publish a whole bunch of Semver versions into your fast channel and just tag a couple of them out into your slow channel.
Right, but in that case, like in that world, you just always stay on stable or you just always stay on beta. And those connections show up anyway, right? Like, what do you lose by defining this as the graph metadata as opposed to just a property?
I think maybe I'm talking about something slightly different.
Sorry, maybe I don't understand.
Yeah. I thought we were talking about a world in which I could have some Semver version that I'm subscribed to in a fast channel and then switch to the stable channel and have an update there. And I think the question is like, how does the stable channel know what stuff it should be allowed to update from? Is that?
Yeah. Well, so yes, I just, so what I'm trying to say though is if like right now when we build edges based on like, let's look at the version and then like create a chain. But if I'm saying like, hey, here's my set of bundles, they're going to go into multiple different channels. And that means that like, I want my stable graph to like have this set of hops, and I want my beta graph to have this set of hops. Why can't you just define that implicitly by the fact that like this bundle has both and its version is X, so that like when I have 1.1.0, there's an edge just implicitly by it being in several different channels to go from 1.1.1 and to go to 1.2.0. Like what value do we get out of you being forced to define both of those separately by default, essentially?
Evan, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Not talking, just making sure I thought about the problem.
So just in my head, while you're thinking about it, I think of the graph as being the Uber graph, and I think of channels of defining edges within that graph. So an overlay. That's kind of how I picture it in my head and how these things would work.
I do think so. If we're talking about this from a consistent update perspective, when we want, essentially, if you're publishing these things, you want what the update options are, and you want to test those edges. That makes more sense to me to be explicit about which things work, because then you basically say, well, I've tested 110 to 111 because that's what's in my fast channel. And now I'm going to go test 110 to 112 because that's in my stable channel. And once I've done that, I add that edge and mark it. Whereas doing it all implicitly, you need to work out what the hops would be if you added it, and make sure you tested those edges first and before you add. Which is not to say that it's invalid, and I think you're making a good point that that might be the way we want to do it by default. But it does seem like there's a lot of value in my mind to just being able to say, like, here's this update edge and we've tested it, so let's just add this one update edge.
Yeah, so like 100% totally agree. Absolutely, like that seems like a thing that we need to support. I'm just thinking as soon as we have a declarative config, that gets you that. So then once we have that, can we go and make the default behavior this other simpler thing so that users don't have to think about it as much, essentially. At least that's how I'm picturing it in my brain. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that definitely simplifies things for users publishing operators. I wonder if this is if this is like an intentional friction, or I wonder if we should think of it as an intentional friction to force authors to think about the updates that consumers can actually get,
so that they don't accidentally break themselves. That's fair.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else on the call has a thought on that. Well, at the very least, it seems clear we should be able to support both of these things.
Yeah.
And the discussion of what the default should be can definitely be kicked out a bit, I think.
So what's the action out of this then, Kevin?
So I think,
Do you want me to create an issue to start there, or do you want to do something different?
so I think what would be very helpful for me is if we listed out what the like set of different operations we're doing and are expecting and what's not happening. And maybe that's the right place for that is an issue. That feels like that's the right place. And then once you lay out like, here's the steps I took, here's what the result was, here was the expected result. Then we can say like, oh, it seems like you need to use a combination of skip patch and then also the annotation. And that probably solves the issue you have for now. And then once we have that laid out, we can use it as a primer for, and here's how we think it should work in the future so that this is like less of an issue for users that are onboarding. So they don't have to do two different things and add a bunch of complexity to their stuff.
Mm-hmm. And this might be a good, if we flesh out what we think it should do in the future, that might be a really good first issue because it's relatively a small change, or at least it sounds like it would be somewhat small.
It could be. I think it depends on what the state of the declarative stuff is, because I think that needs to show up first before we can make it an obvious
that's
change
fair.
here. Yeah.
All right, cool. Noted.
Cool.
Okay, so we're coming up on the last 15 minutes. I'm going to very quickly pivot to the announcement of the Zoom channel. So everybody who is on the OLM Dev Working Group mailing list is going to get a series of notifications, emails, and such, where OLM is just updating the links for the new Zoom hosting meeting. One of the big benefits is that we no longer should have to allow you in to the meeting, so you won't have to wait in this like purgatory phase when you try and join the OLM Dev Working Group. And the other benefit that we're actively working on right now is actually getting it so that our recordings are uploaded to YouTube automatically for easier viewing. Working with the CNCF team so we can actually post directly to it should be pretty great. And the usage of the Zoom account will happen on our next OLM Working Group. I don't know for sure when the YouTube videos will be available, but in the interim, the top of the agenda has been updated with a recordings link. which lists a bunch of links to different, sorry, all the previous recordings, so you can see them there for now. And that's all I needed to say there. And we have Chris with the topic for next time. Chris, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I just so this last week we received a couple of decks from Red Hat, specifically talking about the the next 12 months of OpenShift, and of course they talk about the OLM and OCP kinds of features and operator SDK features that are coming. A lot of them were kind of a surprise to me. I didn't know that they were in the pipeline, but a lot of them have this English version. English, OM consumable version of this, or executive consumable version of the language. So wondering if we could map that to actual enhancements and issues and features, so I could actually know what we're talking about. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, this kind of seems to be a continued discussion of like, how can you understand what's coming in OLM, right? That we had last week. I don't know how much I want to talk about the OpenShift roadmap here. I think we do want to keep this upstream, but I don't want to diminish.
It's still relevant
because
it's setting your priority. Red Hat is setting the priority of the things they want you to deliver from an open source perspective.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into the intricacies about this, but like where these priorities come from, this is something we really need to define for OLM as a whole, and I think it'll be easier once we have the downstream upstream split. But until that plan is really established, I don't know how we could say how we could distinguish, like, this is what OpenShift is doing with OLM versus this is what OLM is doing, right? And Kevin, do you want to talk to this?
So I think if you have specific questions about certain things, I think we'd be happy to talk about them and discuss them. But I tend to agree with Alex that like this is the upstream working group call, and we want to mostly focus on upstream and delivery and like
the development
as a result of that.
Into my Red Hat meetings instead, right? I just was wondering if you guys had, because they should be a one-to-one map, because these are specifically operator lifecycle management features that they are going to officially support in OpenShift. I just wanted to know what the mapping is to the upstream pieces. What does that mean? Their words to actual reality.
Could you give me an example, maybe?
Like they talked about grouping operators together, umbrella operators, and then being able to group them together as units. So is that the label dependency piece?
Yeah, that one I'm actually not sure that we have a good compare. That one feels very like a Red Hat kind of driven request.
So you think that might just be a UI thing that they're doing?
No, I think that one has to do with like the way that dependencies are scoped and what that means. I think that there are some folks that have like opinions about how that should work and how installs work as a result of those things. I don't know that like we specifically have a single initiative upstream to solve that specific problem. I have some opinions on it.
But Red Hat doesn't do it. They don't like they cherry pick pieces of OLM, but they don't fork it, right? So it's still OLM.
That is true as of today. As of a few weeks from now, when we create a downstream repo for it, that will no longer be the case.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what Alex meant with the upstream downstream split. We're actively attempting to separate the upstream project from the downstream OpenShift managed delivered offering. It is true today that they're in the same repo. That won't be the case in a couple weeks.
All right, so this is basically going to remove all of the OpenShift branches out of the upstream stuff, and they'll have their own Git repos.
Yeah, and then any OpenShift specific features will be in a fork and separate from the upstream project.
Oh, okay. So now I'll have two things to track. Awesome.
If you're shipping on OpenShift, you just have the one downstream thing to track, and it'll be a superset of whatever ships upstream.
So is this group then going to also be duplicated so we can talk about the OpenShift or the Red Hat parts then?
I have no idea what that plan is.
Yeah, I mean the goal of this working group is to create an upstream community around operator framework and OLM inside the operator framework. So like from our roles here, like we work at, a lot of us work at Red Hat, but you know, we're actively looking for other upstream contributors outside the scope of our employer. So you know, I think the goal of this meeting and the goal of like the upstream Slack channel and the mailing groups and everything is for our upstream community to be involved in the project and not the product that is a part of OpenShift.
Yeah, and to not only be involved in it, but to also drive it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All of OLM has been driven by us, and we have a lot of tribal knowledge about what we've been doing, but you know, somebody might bring something else to the table that can take us in a better direction. So we're really trying to drive integration with external contributors.
Yep, I understand.
As for what's happening next for OLM, I think the enhancements repo is a much clearer picture of the stuff we're planning to work on in the short term. Then I'm pretty sure that all the like roadmap stuff that you're talking about is public, so it's certainly possible that anyone could just run across a plan for like a group's install of operators, right? But until there's some discussion of it in this group and an enhancement written, we won't really start working on that.
Right.
Okay, cool. No need to beat a dead horse there. We'll just, I think that's everything actually. So are we good to, does anybody have anything else we want to discuss before we call it a day? Once, twice.
I guess I have a question. Is this a forum that we should be talking about new features that we've been working on and we want to start presenting active work and that kind of thing? Or do we want to keep this more as a discussion?
I definitely think that active stuff we're working on should probably be a part of this meeting. It might be that, you know, we talked about it for a few minutes and then, oh, we need to spawn a separate discussion and then we create a mailing list, either thread or maybe we have a separate meeting scheduled specifically for it. I know we started talking about primer meetings for specific initiatives and enhancements that we're trying to write. But at least to like get the conversation started, this seems like the right place to do it.
Yeah, I would
That's
recommend putting things in the agenda. Otherwise, I am going to keep putting stuff in it and trumping anything you guys want to talk about.
I think that's good for upcoming things we want to work on. I more meant like things that have already been worked on that.
Oh, you mean
like for example, we brought up some of the December stuff. I don't know that we've really like presented how that works. We brought up the new resolver stuff. I don't know that we have. We definitely don't have the docs finalized for any of that yet, but it's probably something that we could present here.
Yeah, I think it'd be great if you guys could do playbacks on some of these things as they're finalized. That'd be awesome, because I have to kind of stumble over them, and it's not always clear through the doc what the whole thought process was.
Maybe we can discuss this in the Slack channel, how to best set up all these meetings, because I don't want like there to be some really valid questions that could be discussed in the working group and then not have time to do it because the demo took like 40 minutes. It might be beneficial if we like do impromptu meetings where we kind of schedule these demos.
I mean, I don't know. It feels like we could take 10 or 15 minutes of a bi-weekly meeting to like at least do a demo. Like the resolver is one that you could do in 5 or 10 or 15 minutes at most, and probably get a lot of value out of a lot of people.
Okay, cool. Then we'll just add that to the top of the agenda. Under the why we have this, and we'll just say like to demo some dev work as it comes up. We can, start showcasing.
So I guess, is there anything that anyone on the call has been hoping to know more about that we could think about presentation for an upcoming meeting?
I think that the resolver would be a good one, but that's okay. I've seen it already, so.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. So when you say resolver, you're talking about dependencies YAML and the labels and all that kind of stuff?
So the resolver is a little bit more than just dependencies. The resolver is basically when OLM communicates with a catalog, like the catalog operator talks to catalog sources, which are basically the registry pod that runs. OLM, when you create a subscription, decides what to install by making some queries and then deciding like, oh, these are the set of things we need to create, and then it generates an install plan. The resolver is the piece of code that interacts with the registry and with the cluster to figure out what updates it needs to make. So we basically replaced that entire thing with a SAT solver backed resolver, mostly for the scope of like creating these, doing the dependency work, which is most of what it does now. But it also has some other things that are pretty nice about it, namely that it queries a cache state of the entire registry. So we can start asking other questions at install time that we couldn't before, which I think opens up our ability to do a lot of other things that we just don't do today.
Oh, that's cool. I think that'll also, if we had that kind of demo or discussion, I think that would solidify in my head of what the contract is between all of the different pieces. Right. So where does OLM and OC in the database inside the catalog actually make those decisions, and how does those interacting and so forth? And I think that's part of it, right?
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to end the meeting now and stop recording. Thank you for joining today, guys.
Thanks, guys.